Welcome to our deep dive into the fascinating world of narcissism and social media. You've sent in some research on this, and we're really excited to break it all down with you.
Yeah, we'll be exploring a meta-analytic review that digs deep into this connection, looking at things like how much time people spend online, what they post, and of course those selfie trends, all through the lens of grandiose and vulnerable narcissism.
To get us started, can we define narcissism? Is it always a negative thing?
Well, narcissism is actually a personality trait, and like most traits, it can be expressed in both positive and negative ways. A healthy dose of narcissism can be linked to things like leadership skills, self-confidence, and even overall well-being.
So a little bit of self-love can be a good thing. That's interesting. But where's the line? Where does it become a problem?
Well, as with most things, too much of anything can be harmful. When narcissism becomes excessive, that's when we start to see negative outcomes. Things like aggression, lack of empathy, difficulties in relationships, and fear of commitment.
We hear a lot about different types of narcissism. Does the research distinguish between them?
Yeah, there are two main forms that researchers focus on. Grandiose narcissism is what most people think of when they hear the word narcissist. They're extroverted, attention-seeking, often callous, and really driven by a need for praise and admiration. The classic show-off.
So how is vulnerable narcissism different?
Vulnerable narcissists tend to be more introverted and neurotic. They're very sensitive to criticism and often struggle with low self-esteem. But they might mask these insecurities with a defensive or even arrogant exterior. So it's less about outward displays of superiority and more about an internal struggle with self-worth.
So two very different ways that this one trait can show up. Interesting. Now, connecting this to social media, there's this idea that social media is actually fueling a rise in narcissism. Is there any evidence to support that?
It's definitely a compelling theory, and we are seeing evidence of narcissism scores increasing over time. Social media, with its emphasis on self-promotion and presenting this perfect image, could definitely be playing a role. However, the research we're diving into focuses on how pre-existing narcissistic traits, particularly grandiose narcissism, influence how people behave on social media.
So let's talk about those theoretical models that try to explain this connection. Can you give us a quick overview of the main ones?
Absolutely. One prominent model is the self-enhancement model. This suggests that individuals high in narcissism use social media as a platform for self-promotion, seeking that validation and admiration to feed their inflated sense of self.
That seems pretty intuitive. Are any of the other models drastically different?
The FIT model proposes that the very structure of social media caters to narcissistic tendencies. Platforms like Facebook and Instagram encourage these large networks with tons of followers or friends. This plays right into a narcissist's preference for having a big audience rather than developing deeper, more meaningful connections.
So it's almost like the platform itself encourages superficiality over genuine connection.
That's the idea. And then we have the trait model. This one suggests that people's online behavior is simply an extension of their existing personality traits. For instance, grandiose narcissists tend to be extroverted, and extroversion is often associated with having larger social networks and being more active online in general.
So in a way, social media is just providing a stage for these pre-existing traits to be amplified.
Exactly. It's not necessarily about social media causing narcissism, but rather giving those traits a space to really flourish.
Let's get into the specifics of that meta-analysis you mentioned. What were some of the key findings, especially when it comes to grandiose narcissism in social media?
This particular meta-analysis was conducted by McCain and Campbell back in 2018 at the University of Georgia. They analyzed 62 studies focusing mainly on Facebook, which was really the dominant platform at that time, and the results were pretty telling.
Did they find a strong connection between grandiose narcissism and Facebook use?
They did. There was a statistically significant positive relationship. So basically, grandiose narcissists were not only spending more time on Facebook, they're also posting more frequent status updates. They had more friends and followers, and they uploaded more selfies compared to those lower in narcissism.
So it really paints a picture of someone using the platform to cultivate a very specific image. What about vulnerable narcissism? Did the research find a similar link?
Unfortunately, there isn't enough research yet on vulnerable narcissism and social media to draw any strong conclusions. The few studies that do exist suggest there might not be a significant relationship overall, but we definitely need more research to know for sure.
So that leaves a lot of unanswered questions. What are some potential areas for future research on vulnerable narcissism? Could it be that they're using social media in ways that the current studies just aren't capturing?
That's a great question. Perhaps vulnerable narcissists engage in different behaviors online. Maybe they're more likely to lurk or be very selective in what they post. Or they might be using social media in ways that validate their insecurities more subtly. That's something researchers need to explore further.
Did the meta-analysis also look at different factors that might moderate the relationship between narcissism and social media? What were some of the more interesting findings there?
Well, one thing they found was that culture seems to play a role. The study found that the link between grandiose narcissism and social media use was particularly strong in Russian samples.
That's interesting. Why do you think that might be? Is there something about Russian culture that could explain this stronger link?
Russia has this unique cultural context. It blends individualistic and collectivistic elements, which could be creating an environment where certain expressions of grandiose narcissism are more accepted or even encouraged on social media. Of course, this is just speculation and we need more research to confirm it, but it's definitely an area worth investigating.
So it's not just about personality, it's also about how those personality traits are shaped and expressed within different cultural contexts. Were there any other moderators that really stood out to you?
Another interesting finding was related to age. The researchers found that the relationship between grandiose narcissism and frequent status updates was non-significant for adolescents.
That's surprising. Why would that be? Do you think younger people are just using social media differently, or could this be about how narcissism develops over time?
It's possible that younger people are just using social media differently. Maybe it's so ingrained in their lives that it's less of a reflection of their personality and more just a normal way of communicating. Or maybe there are developmental factors involved that influence how narcissism is expressed at different ages. It's a really interesting question that needs further exploration. And they also found something interesting about the platform itself, specifically on Instagram. The relationship between grandiose narcissism and posting pictures of oneself wasn't statistically significant.
That is curious. Why would Instagram be different? Could it be that the visual focus of the platform somehow changes how narcissism is expressed online? Or even how we measure it?
Yeah, that's definitely possible. Each platform that has its own unique culture and ways of shaping online behavior. So we might find that certain features, like Instagram's emphasis on visuals or Twitter's character limits, bring out different aspects of narcissism. I think more research focusing on those specific platform differences would be really valuable.
So it seems like it's not just about whether someone uses social media, but how they use it and where. Now, going back to the overall findings you mentioned earlier, that correlation doesn't equal causation. Can you explain that a bit more?
Of course, just because we see a connection between narcissism and certain social media behaviors, it doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other. It's probably a lot more complex than that. There's probably a whole interplay of factors involved.
So it's not as simple as saying social media makes people narcissistic or that narcissistic people are drawn to social media.
Right? It's more likely a kind of two-way street. Maybe people with narcissistic tendencies are drawn to social media, and then the environment of the platform kind of amplifies those tendencies.
Ah, so a sort of feedback loop.
Exactly. And it's also possible that there are other variables at play that these studies just didn't measure. We need more sophisticated research methods like experimental and longitudinal studies to really untangle all these relationships and understand the nuances.
What are some key takeaways you think listeners should keep in mind, especially given the limitations of the research we've discussed?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is just awareness. I mean, we all engage in some level of self-presentation online, right? Sharing positive experiences, connecting with friends, even showing off a little bit. It's all part of the online experience. But this research, I think, encourages us to examine our motivations, a little bit of self-reflection. Why are we posting what we're posting? Is it for genuine connection? Or is it driven by this need for validation and external attention? It's a question we should all ask ourselves.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the game of likes and comments and lose sight of why we're even on these platforms in the first place. I think you've raised a really important point. This research is a good reminder to step back and think about our own social media habits and what they might be telling us.
And it's not just about our own behavior either. This research can also give us some insights into the people we're connected with online. Understanding these different forms of narcissism can help us navigate our online interactions in a more informed way.
So if we see someone in our network exhibiting those grandiose narcissistic traits online, constantly bragging or seeking attention, this research can help us make sense of their behavior.
Exactly. It's not about judging or unfriending people, but just having a more informed perspective. Remember, everyone falls somewhere on this narcissism spectrum, and we all have moments where we're more self-focused or seeking validation. It's really about self-awareness and striving for healthy, balanced interactions, both online and offline.
It's about understanding the dynamics at play rather than labeling people. Now, this research focused primarily on grandiose narcissism, but it does make you think about the broader impact of social media on our culture as a whole.
Absolutely. It raises this question of whether social media itself is actually amplifying narcissistic tendencies in our society, even beyond individual personalities. That's something that wasn't directly addressed in this research, but it's definitely worth thinking about.
Yeah, is it the platform shaping us or are we shaping the platform? It's kind of a chicken and egg situation.
Right, it's probably this complex mix of individual personality, evolving social norms, and the ever-changing landscape of technology. That's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. There's still so much to learn and understand.
Yeah, it really does make you think, huh? We've covered so much in this deep dive. Is there anything else you think our listeners should really take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to remember to be mindful and intentional when it comes to social media. It's such a powerful tool, and it can be used for both good and bad. Ultimately, it's up to each of us to decide how we want to use it.
So it's not about letting social media control us. It's about making conscious choices about how we engage with it and how much power we give it.
Exactly. This deep dive has given you a lot to think about, the research, the theories, and all those unanswered questions.
This has definitely been a thought-provoking deep dive. I have a feeling I'm going to be looking at my own social media feed a little differently from now on.
That's great to hear. With a better understanding of these dynamics, you're in a much better position to navigate that world of social media with more awareness and intention.
And for our listener, as you scroll through your feed today, maybe ask yourself this. Is social media helping you connect authentically, or is it just feeding this constant competition for attention? It's something to think about. Until next time.